Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, ancient city, its streets laid out in perfect grid patterns, its buildings constructed with precision that rivals modern engineering. This isn't a scene from a fantasy novel, it's the reality of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of humanity's earliest urban societies, flourishing over 4,000 years ago. Yet, despite its grandeur, this civilization remains shrouded in mystery, its secrets buried beneath layers of time and dust. What happened to these people? How did they achieve such remarkable feats of architecture and planning? And why did their story vanish from history for millennia? Today, we're embarking on a journey to uncover 30 forgotten enigmas of the Indus Valley, puzzles that continue to baffle experts and ignite the imaginations of curious minds like yours. Think about this: we've decoded the hieroglyphs of Egypt, unraveled the cuneiform of Mesopotamia, but the script of the Indus Valley, it's still undeciphered. Hundreds of tiny symbols etched onto seals and pottery, waiting for someone to crack their code, and that's just the beginning. From their sudden disappearance to the eerie absence of grand monuments or obvious rulers, this civilization defies everything we thought we knew about ancient societies. Why did they build such advanced cities, only to leave behind no clear evidence of kings, wars, or temples? What hidden stories lie beneath those carefully planned streets? This video isn't just a list of facts, it's an adventure into the unknown. We'll explore the strange artifacts that don't fit any known purpose, the hauntingly empty cities abandoned without a trace, and the theories that range from the plausible to the downright spine-chilling. By the time we're done, you'll see the Indus Valley not as a dusty relic of the past, but as a living, breathing mystery begging to be solved. So grab your metaphorical explorer's hat, because we're about to dig deep into one of history's most captivating puzzles. Ready to uncover what's been hidden for thousands of years? Let's begin. One of the most tantalizing puzzles left behind by the Indus Valley Civilization isn't a crumbling ruin or a vanished artifact, it's their writing. Hundreds of tiny, intricate symbols carved into seals, pottery, and tablets, a silent language that has stubbornly resisted translation for over a century. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, which were cracked using famous artifacts like the Rosetta Stone, the Indus script offers no such key. Each attempt to decipher it feels like trying to solve a riddle written in smoke. Just when you think you've grasped a pattern, it slips away. What makes this script so elusive? For starters, the inscriptions are frustratingly short. Most contain only 5 or 6 symbols, with none stretching longer than 20. Without longer texts or a bilingual inscription to compare it to, linguists are left guessing. Some argue it represents a fully developed writing system, perhaps logographic like Chinese, where symbols stand for words or ideas. Others suggest it might be proto-writing, a mix of signs and numbers used for trade rather than storytelling. Then there's the wild card theory. What if it's not language at all, but a system of clan symbols or religious sigils? Without context, every interpretation feels like grasping at shadows. Modern technology has thrown its hat into the ring, with artificial intelligence analyzing symbol patterns and statistical frequencies. Early machine learning studies hint that the script may indeed encode a spoken language, but without knowing which one, even AI hits a wall. The irony is palpable. We can map the genome of millennia-old skeletons, reconstruct entire cities from satellite imagery, yet these tiny marks outwit us. The people of the Indus Valley clearly had something to say. Until we crack their code, their voices remain just out of reach, whispering secrets we can't yet hear. Mohenjo-Daro, the crown jewel of the Indus Valley, once thrived with bustling markets, advanced drainage systems, and homes built with bricks so precise they fit together like puzzle pieces. Then, around 1900 BC, something went terribly wrong. The streets emptied, the wells dried up, and one of the world's first great cities became a ghost town. its abandonment so sudden that archaeologists have found half-eaten meals still sitting in bowls untouched for thousands of years. What could have caused such a dramatic collapse? The theories range from the scientifically plausible to the downright fantastical, each more intriguing than the last. Let's start with the most grounded explanation: climate change. Geological evidence suggests the region's lifeblood, the mighty Saraswati River, mentioned in ancient Vedic texts, began to vanish, its waters diverted or swallowed by shifting landscapes. Without this vital water source, crops would have failed, trade routes crumbled, and survival became impossible. Skeletons discovered in the city's ruins show signs of malnutrition, hinting at a slow, agonizing decline. But here's the twist: Mohenjo-Daro wasn't alone. Dozens of Indus settlements show similar abandonment layers, as if an entire civilization quietly stepped off the stage of history. Then there's the more controversial angle: ancient nuclear warfare. Yes, you heard that right. In the 1960s, a researcher claimed to have found evidence of vitrified bricks and skeletal remains with radiation burns, suggesting an otherworldly catastrophe. But before you picture prehistoric atomic blasts, let's set the record straight. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these claims as pseudoscience. The vitrified bricks, likely just the result of ordinary fires or kilns. The skeletons, more probably victims of flooding or violence, not some lost superweapon. Yet the myth persists, fueled by our love for cosmic mysteries. So where does that leave us? The truth is likely less dramatic but no less fascinating. A perfect storm of environmental shifts, economic strain, and perhaps even social unrest may have pushed Mohenjo-Daro to the brink. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the people of the Indus Valley left no boastful inscriptions or monuments to their own demise. Their end came not with a bang, but with a whisper, a civilization so advanced yet so fragile that even its downfall remains a carefully guarded secret. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, you'll notice something strikingly absent: no towering ziggurats reaching for the heavens, no colossal temples adorned with gods, no grand palaces proclaiming the power of kings. While ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia built monuments to glorify rulers and deities, the Indus Valley Civilization took a radically different path. Their cities, meticulously planned and engineered, reveal a society that prioritized function over ostentation, leaving archaeologists to wonder: did they reject the idea of centralized power altogether, or did their leaders operate in ways we simply don't understand yet? Compare this to Mesopotamia, where the towering ziggurat of Ur served as both temple and administrative center, or to Egypt's pyramids, which shouted the pharaoh's divinity to the world. These structures weren't just buildings, they were statements designed to awe and intimidate. The Indus people, on the other hand, invested their ingenuity in something far more practical: an unparalleled urban infrastructure. Their cities boasted advanced drainage systems, public wells, and uniform brick sizes, suggesting a society focused on collective well-being rather than the glorification of a few. Even the largest structures unearthed, like the so-called Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, lack the grandeur typical of royal or religious monuments elsewhere. Was this a deliberate choice, or have we just failed to recognize their equivalent of palaces and temples? Some scholars argue the absence of obvious rulers points to an early experiment in egalitarianism. Without clear evidence of kings, armies, or enslaved laborers, it's possible power was distributed among merchant guilds, councils, or even neighborhood assemblies. Artifacts like standardized weights and measures hint at a society built on trade and cooperation, not coercion. But here's the twist: recent discoveries of ornate jewelry, high-walled citadels, and seals depicting possible deities suggest hierarchies might have existed, just in subtler forms. Perhaps their leaders ruled through economic control rather than brute force, or maybe their symbols of power were perishable, crafted from wood or cloth that decayed over millennia. Then there's the spiritual angle. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where gods demanded colossal shrines, Indus spirituality might have been domestic or decentralized. Small fire altars found in homes, along with terracotta figurines resembling fertility goddesses, imply rituals were personal rather than state-sponsored. Could their temples have been open-air spaces or riverbanks where water itself was sacred? Without deciphering their script, we're left piecing together a religion from silent artifacts, a puzzle missing half its pieces. The mystery deepens when you consider what this says about their worldview. While other civilizations celebrated conquest and divine kingship, the Indus Valley's legacy is one of shared urban harmony. Their cities thrived for centuries without fortifications or obvious signs of war, a rarity in the ancient world. Were they a peaceable kingdom, or have we underestimated the complexity of their power structures? Until we uncover more, their quiet revolution building a civilization without monuments to ego remains one of history's most provocative silent statements. Buried in the heart of Mohenjo-Daro lies a structure so perplexing that it continues to divide archaeologists a century after its discovery, the Great Bath. This rectangular pool, lined with precisely fitted bricks and sealed with a natural tar to prevent leaks, stands as one of the most sophisticated feats of ancient engineering. But what exactly was its purpose? A sacred space for ritual purification, a communal hub for social bonding, or perhaps the world's first public swimming pool? The answer might lie somewhere between all three, wrapped in layers of cultural significance we're still unraveling. Step into the Great Bath's design and you'll see a marvel of foresight. The pool itself measures roughly 12 meters by 7 meters, with a depth of nearly 2.5 meters, large enough to immerse dozens of people at once. Surrounding it are small changing rooms and a network of staircases, suggesting careful planning for access and privacy. But the real genius lies beneath, an intricate drainage system that allowed water to be emptied and refilled through a series of corbelled channels, a feature unmatched by any other civilization of its time. This wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a carefully maintained aquatic stage for activities we can only speculate about. Now let's talk rituals. The bath's layout bears eerie similarities to later Hindu traditions of ceremonial bathing, like those still practiced along the Ganges today. Could this have been a prototype for the sacred tanks found in temples across South Asia? Some scholars argue the Great Bath's alignment with celestial events hints at a spiritual function, perhaps tied to lunar cycles or seasonal festivals. Others point to the absence of overt religious symbols, suggesting it may have served a more practical role, a communal space where trade deals were sealed or disputes settled over shared immersion. Then there's the recreational angle. With its surrounding galleries and shaded verandas, the complex feels oddly modern, like an ancient version of a social club or public bathhouse. Imagine merchants from distant regions gathering here after long journeys, not just to cleanse their bodies but to exchange news and goods in a neutral, water-bound space. The bath's very design, neither fully enclosed nor entirely open, creates an atmosphere of controlled intimacy, perfect for networking or quiet reflection. Yet the most tantalizing clue might be what's missing. Unlike Egyptian or Mesopotamian ritual sites, there are no inscriptions dedicating the bath to a particular god, no carvings of priestly processions. This silence speaks volumes. Perhaps the Great Bath's true purpose was fluid, adapting to the needs of its people across generations, sometimes spiritual, sometimes social, always central to the rhythm of urban life. Until we decipher the Indus script, this architectural enigma remains a mirror, reflecting not just water, but our own endless fascination with the minds who built it. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, or any of the smaller Indus Valley settlements, and you'll notice something astonishing: the bricks. Not just their durability, which has survived millennia, but their uncanny uniformity. Every brick, whether from a grand citadel or a humble dwelling, adheres to the same exact ratio, 1:2:4. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, civilization-wide standard, a level of precision that rivals modern construction codes. How did a Bronze Age society achieve such consistency across hundreds of miles? And what does this tell us about their unseen rulers or trade networks? Let's put this in perspective. Modern construction relies on centralized manufacturers and strict regulations to maintain uniformity. Yet, the Indus Valley cities, separated by vast distances, managed this without any evidence of a bureaucracy enforcing standards. The bricks from Mohenjo-Daro, for instance, match those found in distant Dholavira, as if stamped from the same mold. This implies a shared system of measurement so ingrained that it transcended individual cities. Were there roving inspectors ensuring compliance, or was this knowledge passed down through generations of craftsmen like a sacred craft tradition? The precision goes beyond mere aesthetics. Standardized bricks meant faster construction, interchangeable repairs, and efficient use of materials, an ancient version of modular design. Imagine a trader from Harappa arriving in Lothal, 1,000 kilometers away, and knowing exactly how many bricks his cargo would yield for a warehouse. This logistical harmony suggests an interconnected economy, possibly overseen by guilds or councils who prioritized function over territorial pride. Unlike Egypt, where pharaohs imposed their will through pyramid labor, the Indus system feels collaborative, as if consensus drove their innovation. But here's the twist: such uniformity usually requires centralized authority. Think of the Roman Empire's roads or Qin dynasty China's standardized cart axles, both achievements of top-down control. Yet, the Indus Valley leaves no tablets glorifying a king's decree, no monuments celebrating bureaucratic triumphs. Could their government have been a network of merchant elites, or was conformity so culturally ingrained that enforcement wasn't needed? Recent studies of brick-clay sources hint at regional production hubs, perhaps supplying multiple cities under shared agreements. The mystery deepens when you compare their bricks to others of the era. Mesopotamian constructions vary wildly in size, reflecting local whims or resource limits. Even Egypt's pyramids used rough-cut stones hidden beneath polished veneers. The Indus people, though, built their entire society on mathematical harmony, a silent testament to a worldview that valued order invisibly without fanfare. Were they the ancient world's first pragmatists, or is their lack of monumental ego itself a kind of power statement? Until we decode their script, these perfect little bricks remain mute witnesses to a system far ahead of its time, and far more enigmatic than any grand pyramid. Amidst the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary: a tiny bronze figure just 11 centimeters tall, that would become one of the most debated artifacts of the ancient world. Known as the Dancing Girl, this figurine stands with one hand defiantly perched on her hip, the other dangling loosely at her side, her head tilted back as if caught mid-motion. But here's the puzzle: in a civilization that left behind thousands of seals, pottery fragments, and tools, human representations are vanishingly rare. So who was she? A temple dancer frozen in ritual movement, a revered deity, or simply a snapshot of everyday life? Her pose alone sparks endless theories. The slight arch of her back and the relaxed asymmetry of her limbs suggest motion, leading many to interpret her as a performer, perhaps part of ceremonies we can only imagine. But look closer: the bangles stacked up her arms, the necklace draped around her neck. Even the casual confidence of her stance feels strikingly modern. Unlike the rigid, symbolic art of Mesopotamia or Egypt, this figure pulses with individuality. Was she a portrait of someone real, a woman whose name we'll never know but whose presence still vibrates across 4,000 years? Then there's the craftsmanship. The dancing girl wasn't just molded, she was cast using the lost wax technique, a method so advanced for its time that it wouldn't become widespread elsewhere for centuries. Artisans would have sculpted her in wax, encased her in clay, then melted the wax away to pour molten bronze into the hollow space, an intricate process demanding skill and patience. Why invest such effort in a figurine this small, unless, of course, she held outsized significance? Some scholars argue her alloy, a mix of copper and tin, hints at connections to distant mines, proving the Indus Valley's trade network stretched farther than we thought. Yet the most haunting question isn't how she was made, but why she's alone. Almost no other human-like bronzes have been found in Indus cities. Does her isolation mean she was sacred, or does it reflect a cultural taboo against depicting people? Compare her to the terracotta, mother goddess figurines found elsewhere, stylized, exaggerated, clearly symbolic. The dancing girl, in contrast, feels alive. Maybe she wasn't meant to represent an idea, but to capture a moment, a celebration, a prayer, or just a woman pausing to stretch after a long day. The mystery deepens when you consider what her existence implies. If she was a dancer, did Indus cities have theaters or music we've yet to uncover? If a goddess, why no temples to house her? And if ordinary, why no other snapshots of daily life? Her silence is deafening. Unlike Egyptian tomb paintings or Mesopotamian statues shouting king's glory, this bronze whispers intimacy, a fleeting glimpse into a world that valued subtlety over spectacle. Until we decipher the script beside her, she remains both a masterpiece and a riddle, a single flicker of movement in the vast, still darkness of the past. Among the many riddles of the Indus Valley, one stands out as particularly striking. Their cities show no signs of warfare. No towering fortifications, no stockpiles of weapons, no murals glorifying conquest. In an era when neighboring civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt were erecting walls and carving battle scenes into stone, the Indus people seem to have built something radical, a society that might have rejected war altogether. But was this a conscious choice, a cultural blind spot in the archaeological record, or something even more unexpected? Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, and you won't find the jagged teeth of defensive ramparts or the scorch marks of sacked buildings. Unlike Ur's massive walls or the fortified citadels of Mycenae, Indus cities sprawled openly, their streets grid-like and unguarded. Even their art tells a silent story. Seals depict animals, plants, and ritual scenes, but never warriors or weapons. The few copper blades found are more likely tools than swords. This absence is so glaring that early archaeologists assumed they'd missed something, that battlefields must lie undiscovered. Yet decades of excavation have turned up nothing to contradict the initial impression. Here was a civilization that, for centuries, might have thrived without war. So how did they manage it? One theory paints the Indus Valley as history's first merchant superpower, a network of city-states bound by trade rather than tribute. Their standardized weights, sprawling dockyards, and seals found as far as Mesopotamia suggest an economy built on exchange, not extraction. Imagine a Bronze Age version of the Hanseatic League, where conflict hurt profits and stability meant wealth. In this light, their lack of fortifications wasn't weakness, it was a calculated strategy, a bet that open gates attracted more prosperity than closed ones. But another perspective suggests something deeper, a cultural aversion to violence. Some scholars point to the prevalence of female figurines and water symbolism as hints of a society that venerated fertility and flow over dominance. Compare this to Mesopotamia's thunder gods or Egypt's pharaohs smiting enemies. The Indus Valley's ethos, if their artifacts speak true, might have prioritized harmony both with nature and each other. Even their city layouts, with shared wells and drainage systems, reflect a communal mindset rare in the ancient world. Then there's the skeptic's view: absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Could weapons have been made of perishable materials like wood or leather, lost to time? Might their battles have been fought far from cities, leaving no trace in the ruins we found? It's possible, but the sheer consistency across dozens of sites still whispers something extraordinary. No civilization is a utopia, yet the Indus people seem to have sidestepped the blood-soaked playbook of their contemporaries, if only for a while. The most haunting possibility that their peace contained the seeds of their downfall. When climate change dried up the Saraswati River and trade networks frayed, a society unused to conflict may have lacked the tools to adapt. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where wars forged resilient states, the Indus Valley's harmony might have been its fragility. Or perhaps they simply chose to fade rather than fight, their legacy not carved in conquest but etched in quiet bricks and unguarded streets, a challenge to our assumptions about what makes a civilization endure. Buried in the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, a tiny soapstone seal no larger than a postage stamp has ignited one of the most heated debates in ancient history. Etched onto its surface is a figure seated cross-legged, horns crowning his head, surrounded by 4 wild animals. For decades, scholars have called this the Pashupati seal, drawing bold connections between this 4,000-year-old image and the Hindu god Shiva, the lord of beasts and master of meditation. But is this really a proto-Shiva, a glimpse of religious continuity stretching unbroken from the Indus Valley to modern Hinduism? Or are we projecting later beliefs onto an image whose true meaning died with its creators? Let's start with the visual evidence. The seal's central figure sits in what unmistakably resembles a yogic posture, spine straight, heels pressed together, a position any modern practitioner would recognize as a meditative asana. His headdress sprouts what could be horns or perhaps crescent moons, eerily echoing Shiva's crescent-adorned hair. The animals encircling him, an elephant, tiger, rhinoceros, and buffalo, mirror Shiva's role as Pashupati, lord of all creatures. Even the figure's apparent 3 faces hint at Shiva's later trinity aspects. At first glance, the parallels feel uncanny, as if the seal were a blueprint for a deity still worshipped thousands of years later. But here's where it gets complicated. The Indus Valley script remains undeciphered, so we have no text to confirm who or what this figure represents. Early archaeologists, steeped in colonial-era assumptions about a primitive past needing connection to living Hinduism, may have jumped to conclusions. Contemporary scholars caution against flattening the image's complexity. Could the horned figure be a shaman, a local deity, or even a symbolic representation of ecological harmony? Without context, declaring him Shiva feels like finding a cross in an ancient ruin and assuming it's Christian. The counterargument is equally fascinating. Shiva's roots are notoriously elusive in the Vedic texts, where he emerges almost fully formed, unlike gods like Indra or Agni, whose evolution is well documented. Could Shiva's origins lie in pre-Vedic traditions carried forward by Indus Valley descendants? Folk rituals across South India still worship horned deities reminiscent of the seal, and tribal communities maintain traditions of animal-linked spirits that predate classical Hinduism. The seal might not depict Shiva as we know him, but something even more profound, a spiritual idea so resilient its shape shifted across millennia. Then there's the archaeological context. Unlike later Hindu art bursting with divine narratives, the Pashupati seal stands alone. No other Indus artifact so clearly prefigures a known deity. Does this make it a rare glimpse of surviving belief, or an outlier we've overinterpreted? Modern nationalistic agendas further muddy the waters, with some groups keen to claim the seal as proof of Hinduism's indigenous antiquity, while others dismiss any connection as wishful thinking. Perhaps the truth lies in the middle. The seal's power isn't that it proves Shiva's direct lineage, but that it reveals how ancient South Asia's spiritual imagination was, how themes of meditation, nature worship, and divine lordship flickered across cultures long before they coalesced into formal gods. Whether the figure is Shiva's ancestor or a forgotten archetype, His silent, cross-legged pose whispers one undeniable truth: some ideas are too powerful to stay buried. Built on a sun-baked island in what's now the Rann of Kutch, Dholavira shouldn't have survived, let alone thrived, for over 1,500 years. Surrounded by salt flats and scorched earth, this city had one weapon against the desert: water. Not just any water, but every single drop of monsoon rain, meticulously captured, stored, and distributed through a system so advanced it would make modern engineers pause. 16 reservoirs, some carved into bedrock, others lined with precisely fitted stone, all interconnected by channels that funneled rainwater with near-surgical precision. This wasn't just survival, it was hydrological mastery in a land where water was more precious than gold. Step into Dholavira's design, and you'll see a blueprint for sustainability written in stone. The city sat on a slope, allowing gravity to guide water through a network of drains and check dams into massive tanks. The largest reservoir stretched over 70 meters long and 7 meters deep, enough to supply thousands for months. But here's the stroke of genius: they didn't just store water, they protected it. Layers of silt traps filtered debris, while sluice gates controlled flow to prevent flooding or waste. In a climate where monsoons were brief but brutal, every innovation aimed at balancing feast and famine. Now consider the scale of their foresight. Unlike Mohenjo-Daro's wells or Harappa's baths, Dholavira's system was city-wide, serving not just elites but every neighborhood. Channels ran alongside streets, ensuring equal access, a radical notion of equity for its time. Even their waste management tied into the water cycle, with runoff flushing sewage away from living areas. This wasn't just engineering, it was a philosophy, a recognition that water bound the community together. Yet the greatest mystery isn't how they built it, but why their knowledge faded. When later cities like Petra or Roman aqueducts rose, they borrowed from predecessors. Dholavira's wisdom, though, seemingly evaporated with its decline. Perhaps the answer lies in specialization. Their systems were so site-specific, tailored to monsoons and local geology, that when migration scattered their people, the techniques couldn't translate. Or maybe the very perfection of their design became a liability. With no need to adapt until climate shifts overwhelmed them, the knowledge died unchallenged. Today, as megacities sink into drought, Dholavira's ghost whispers lessons. Rajasthan's modern rainwater harvesting revives ancient methods, proving their principles still hold. But the real takeaway: their system worked because it wasn't just technical, it was cultural. Water wasn't a commodity, it was a covenant. That may be the hardest truth to reclaim, not the stones they laid, but the shared purpose that made those stones matter. In the final layers of Mohenjo-Daro's ruins, archaeologists made a grim discovery: skeletons. Not the orderly burials of a peaceful city, but bodies strewn haphazardly as if frozen mid-flight. A woman sprawled face down near a well, her arm outstretched. A cluster of 9 skeletons in a narrow alley, some with fractured skulls. For decades, these scenes fueled dramatic theories of a violent end: invaders sweeping through the streets, cutting down civilians where they stood. But as with everything in the Indus Valley, the truth is far more complex, buried under layers of misinterpretation and sensationalism. The massacre narrative took root in the early 20th century, when colonial-era scholars, steeped in tales of conquest, saw these skeletons as proof of an Aryan invasion. A wave of warrior nomads from the north who supposedly toppled the Indus cities. The Rig Veda, an ancient Indian text, mentions battles with dark-skinned foes, which some hastily linked to Mohenjo-Daro's demise. But here's the problem: the skeletal evidence doesn't hold up. No weapons were found among the bodies, and the fractures could just as easily stem from collapsing buildings or post-death disturbances. Carbon dating reveals these individuals died centuries apart, not in a single catastrophic event. The massacre might be nothing more than a collection of unrelated tragedies piled atop one another in the same ruins. So what really happened? Start with the floods. Mohenjo-Daro means Mound of the Dead. For a reason, the city was rebuilt at least 7 times, each layer suggesting a cycle of destruction and renewal. Geological studies show the Indus River once shifted violently, unleashing torrents that could drown entire neighborhoods, those skeletons near the well. Perhaps victims of a sudden deluge caught trying to flee rising waters. The fractured skulls may be debris from collapsing walls, not weapons. Then there's disease. Analysis of the bones reveals signs of chronic malnutrition, hinting at a population already weakened by famine or illness. Could a plague have struck, leaving corpses abandoned in streets too overwhelmed for proper burials? Unlike later civilizations that documented epidemics, the Indus people left no written records, only silent bones bearing clues we're still piecing together. But the most compelling theory involves none of these dramatic endings. Instead, it points to a slow unraveling. As the Saraswati River dried up and trade networks collapsed, Mohenjo-Daro's residents may have simply left. The last skeletons could be those who stayed too long, succumbing to starvation or conflict over dwindling resources. No grand invasion, no apocalyptic flood, just a civilization fading under the weight of environmental and economic strain. This quiet, undramatic decline might be the hardest for us to accept. We're drawn to narratives of fire and sword, but the Indus Valley's end was likely as subtle as its rise. The scattered skeletons aren't proof of a single catastrophe, but fragments of a long goodbye, a people stepping off history's stage not with a bang, but with the weary sigh of a city that had run its course. For centuries, Indus Valley traders sent their goods westward, seals carved with enigmatic symbols, carnelian beads the color of dried blood, ivory combs fit for Mesopotamian royalty. Archaeologists have found these artifacts scattered across ancient Sumer, proof of a thriving exchange that linked 2 of the world's earliest civilizations. Then, around 1900 BC, the trail goes cold. No more seals in Ur's ruins, no beads in the palaces of Akkad. This wasn't a gradual decline. It was as if someone flipped a switch, severing a connection that had endured for generations. So what severed this Bronze Age trade network, and why does its abrupt end hint at a crisis deeper than mere economics? The scale of this trade was staggering. Ships laden with Indus goods would have sailed the Persian Gulf, their cargo destined for Mesopotamian elites who craved exotic luxuries. Cuneiform tablets from the era mention a place called Meluha, almost certainly the Indus Valley, describing it as a land of precious woods, rare stones, and skilled artisans. One Sumerian text even praises Meluhan interpreters, suggesting face-to-face negotiations in bustling port cities. But here's the twist. Around the same time trade collapsed, Mesopotamian records begin referring to Meluha as a decayed or distant land. The shift in tone is unmistakable, like hearing a friend speak of a once great neighbor now fallen on hard times. Start with the ecological angle. As the Saraswati River dried up, the entire Indus economy would have shuddered. This wasn't just a loss of water, it meant the disintegration of inland trade routes that fed goods to coastal ports. Imagine a merchant in Lothal, the great harbor city, watching as overland caravans grew sparse. Without raw materials from the hinterlands, craft production dwindled. No beads meant nothing to exchange for Mesopotamian silver, and without silver, the entire system ground to a halt. But climate change alone doesn't explain why alternative routes weren't forged, unless, of course, the crisis was too swift to adapt to. Then there's the political lens. Mesopotamian texts from this period speak of rising chaos, dynasties collapsing, foreign invasions, a time when who was king, who was not king, became a literal question. If Indus traders relied on stable partners in Sumer or Akkad, that instability would have made commerce treacherous. Pirates may have infested the Gulf, or perhaps rising tariffs made the journey unprofitable. But the most intriguing clue comes from archaeology. Indus-style seals found in Mesopotamia suddenly bear cruder, cheaper designs. Were desperate merchants cutting corners, or were imitators flooding the market as the real trade network frayed? Competition offers another piece of the puzzle. Around the same period, modern Bahrain emerged as a middleman, funneling goods from Oman and Iran instead of the Indus. Perhaps Mesopotamians found new sources for lapis lazuli or ivory, leaving Meluhan traders obsolete. Or consider the elephant in the room, the mysterious sea peoples who later ravaged Mediterranean civilizations may have had earlier counterparts disrupting Gulf trade. Without written records from the Indus side, we're left peering through Mesopotamian accounts like a one-sided phone call, catching only fragments of a larger conversation. The chilling possibility that the trade collapse wasn't just a symptom of the Indus decline, it was a cause. Losing access to Mesopotamian silver and tin, crucial for bronze, would have crippled tool production and weaponry. A death spiral began. No trade meant less wealth meant weaker cities meant fewer goods to trade. By the time the last Indus merchant packed up his stall, the civilization's fate may have already been sealed, not by invasion or catastrophe, but by the slow, silent unraveling of connections that once bound it to the world. The artifacts left behind aren't just souvenirs of commerce, they're the echoes of a network that kept an entire civilization alive. While pharaohs built pyramids to house their mummified bodies and Mesopotamian kings filled vaults with golden death masks, the rulers of the Indus Valley, if they existed at all, chose a startlingly different path. Not a single royal tomb, no hoard of grave goods, not even an inscription boasting of a ruler's afterlife has been found in their meticulously planned cities. This absence isn't just puzzling, it challenges everything we assume about how ancient civilizations venerated their elite. Were these people cremating their leaders, hiding cemeteries we've yet to uncover, or did they view death and power in ways that left no trace for archaeologists to find? Take Egypt as the obvious counterpoint. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun were buried with entire rooms of treasures, chariots, jewelry, even food for the afterlife, all meant to proclaim their status for eternity. Mesopotamian royal tombs at Ur held not just gold but sacrificed attendants, proof of a king's authority extending beyond death. Yet in Mohenjo-Daro, the grandest structures are public baths and warehouses, not mortuary temples. The few Indus graves discovered are simple pits with little more than pottery or personal ornaments, indistinguishable between rich and poor. This egalitarianism in death speaks volumes. Either their rulers were astonishingly humble, or their symbols of power were perishable, woven into fabrics or carved from wood that decayed millennia ago. Could cremation explain the gap? Later Hindu traditions, which may have roots in the Indus Valley, often practiced cremation, scattering ashes in rivers. If the Indus elite did the same, it would leave no grand tombs behind, only whispers of ceremonies lost to time. But here's the catch: cremation typically leaves behind charred bone fragments, and these are conspicuously absent in Indus cities. Unless they disposed of remains in rivers now long dry, the mystery only deepens. Then there's the possibility of undiscovered cemeteries. Most excavations have focused on city centers. Perhaps royal burial grounds lie beyond the urban sprawl, waiting beneath modern villages or farmland. The recent discovery of a mass burial site in Rakhigarhi, still under study, hints there's more to find. But even there, the graves lack the opulence expected of rulers. Unless future digs unveil a hidden valley of the Indus kings, the evidence points to a culture that simply didn't equate status with posthumous displays. The most radical theory, that the Indus Valley operated without rulers as we understand them. Imagine a society where governance was collective, where merchant councils or neighborhood assemblies held sway instead of a single god king. Without centralized authority, there'd be no need for tombs proclaiming one person's supremacy. Their city's uniformity, the standardized bricks, the shared water systems, suggest a culture prioritizing communal benefit over individual glorification. Even their art avoids heroic depictions, no carvings of conquerors on chariots, just animals and enigmatic symbols. Yet a haunting question lingers: if they had no kings, who coordinated the labor to build those perfect grids of streets or the massive dock at Lothal? How did they maintain quality control across thousands of identical bricks without someone enforcing standards? The answer might lie in something subtler than crowns and palaces. A leadership tied to trade guilds or priestly roles, their authority fluid and temporary. Or perhaps we're looking for the wrong clues. If their power was rooted in control of water or ritual knowledge, not land or armies, their monuments could have been intangible. Songs, dances, or stories that dissolved with their voices. The silence of their graves is a riddle that rewrites the script of ancient power. While Egypt and Mesopotamia shouted their hierarchies into eternity with stone and gold, the Indus Valley whispers a different possibility: that some civilizations measured greatness not by what they took to the grave, but by what they left for the living. Of all the symbols left behind by the Indus Valley people, one image appears again and again: a peculiar creature carved onto hundreds of tiny stone seals, its body resembling a bull but crowned with a single curved horn. Scholars call it the unicorn, though it bears little resemblance to the graceful white steeds of European myth. This stocky, often cross-hatched animal is the most common motif in Indus art, appearing on over half of all recovered seals. Yet here's the paradox: while this creature dominates their miniature carvings, not a single depiction of it exists in their pottery, wall art, or surviving sculptures. Why would an image so ubiquitous in one medium vanish everywhere else? Look closely at these seals, and the details only deepen the puzzle. The unicorn typically stands before what looks like a ritual stand or incense burner, its head turned slightly as if acknowledging an unseen presence. Some seals show it with pipal leaves, a tree later sacred in Hinduism, sprouting above its back. The craftsmanship varies wildly, from crude sketches to intricate designs where the creature's muscles ripple beneath its hide. But what was it? A deity, a clan emblem, or something more practical? The bull theory holds weight. Modern South Asian breeds like the Brahman cattle have pronounced humps and thick necks, not unlike the unicorn's silhouette. Perhaps the single horn is artistic shorthand, a way to show a bull in profile without carving both horns. Yet if that's true, why do other Indus seals clearly depict two horned bulls with meticulous accuracy? The difference is too stark to dismiss as mere style. Then there's the mythical angle. Cultures worldwide have invented hybrid creatures: Egypt's Sphinx, Mesopotamia's Lamashu, to represent divine power. Could the unicorn be the Indus Valley's version, a protector spirit or symbol of prosperity? The ritual stand beside it hints at ceremonial use, maybe a charm pressed into clay to seal trade goods or mark sacred offerings. But without texts to explain its role, we're left guessing whether it was worshipped, feared, or simply a popular artistic motif. The most tantalizing clue lies in its exclusivity. That these images appear only on seals suggests a specialized function, perhaps a merchant's signature or a family crest. Indus seals have been found as far as Mesopotamia, implying the unicorn wasn't just local superstition but a recognized symbol across trade networks. Maybe it wasn't meant to depict a real or mythical beast at all, but an early corporate logo stamped onto shipments of cotton or lapis lazuli like a Bronze Age brand. What's truly unsettling is how little the image evolved over centuries. Unlike Egyptian gods who shift forms across dynasties, the unicorn stays eerily consistent, as if its meaning was so universally understood that no one dared alter it. That very consistency gnaws at archaeologists. Symbols this persistent usually reflect something fundamental: a god, a social structure, a shared story. Yet the Indus people left us the symbol without the key, a visual mantra whose meaning died with those who carved it. Today, as modern scholars digitize and compare every known seal, patterns emerge. The unicorn often appears alongside a handful of recurring script signs, like a caption waiting to be read. Could those tiny marks hold its name? Until we crack the script, the unicorn remains both the most familiar and most alien artifact of the Indus Valley, a creature frozen in stone, guarding secrets we've yet to unravel. Deep beneath the streets of Mohenjo-Daro, hidden from view but fundamental to daily life, ran a network of sewers so advanced they wouldn't be matched for over 3,000 years. Every home, from the smallest workers' dwelling to the largest courtyard house, had its own bathroom, a brick-lined chamber with a sloping floor that drained into covered channels running beneath the streets. These weren't crude pits or open ditches, but carefully engineered conduits designed with gradients to prevent blockages, equipped with inspection manholes for maintenance, and even featuring traps to keep foul odors from seeping back into homes. In an era when Mesopotamians were dumping waste into alleyways and Egyptians relied on the Nile's seasonal floods to wash away refuse, the Indus Valley's obsession with cleanliness bordered on revolutionary. What's truly staggering is the scale of their vision. This wasn't a privilege reserved for elite. Sewer connections appear in even modest neighborhoods, suggesting sanitation was a communal priority. The system's sophistication goes beyond mere functionality. It reveals a profound understanding of urban health. At Harappa, drains were lined with gypsum plaster to resist erosion, while Mohenjo-Daro's main sewer channels intersected with sump pits to collect sediment before it could clog the network. Some houses had chutes on upper floors, hinting at multi-story plumbing. For context, Rome's famed Cloaca Maxima, built over 2 millennia later, functioned more as an open storm drain than a true sewer, and medieval European cities would regress to tossing chamber pots into the streets. The question isn't just how they built it, but why this knowledge vanished. Unlike architectural styles or pottery designs, which often diffuse between cultures, sanitation technology seemingly died with the Indus Valley. One theory points to their unique urban ethos. While contemporary civilizations like Egypt centralized power around pharaohs and temples, Indus cities may have prioritized collective well-being, a social contract where public health trumped individual grandeur. When climate change and economic collapse scattered their populations, this communal mindset might have fractured beyond recovery, another possibility. Their systems were too site-specific to transplant. The Indus settlements thrived on flat alluvial plains where gravity-assisted drainage was possible without complex aqueducts. Later cities in Persia or Greece, built on hillsides, couldn't replicate the model without radical adaptation. There's also the eerie absence of spin-off technologies, no simpler versions in smaller towns, no gradual evolution from cruder prototypes. The system appears fully formed, like a sudden flash of brilliance with no obvious lineage. The most haunting explanation is that their priorities were simply too alien to catch on. Ancient societies often linked cleanliness to ritual purity. Think of Hindu ablutions or Jewish mikvehs, but the Indus approach was ruthlessly pragmatic. Their sewers weren't tied to temples or gods. They were municipal infrastructure, as mundane as streetlights in a modern city. When later cultures developed sanitation, it re-emerged as a luxury for baths and elite villas, not a universal right. That distinction between public utility and private privilege may be the real mystery buried in those brick-lined drains. Today, as archaeologists map these networks with ground-penetrating radar, the lesson isn't just about ancient engineering prowess. It's about a civilization that valued invisible systems over visible monuments, where the greatest innovations served not kings but cobblers and cooks. The irony is cruel. The very humility of their achievement, hidden underground, uncelebrated in inscriptions, may be why it took us 4,000 years to recognize its genius. Among the scattered artifacts of the Indus Valley, one stone figure stands apart. A bearded man with half-closed eyes and a thin cloth draped over his left shoulder, his lips curled in what might be a smile or a meditative grimace. Discovered in Mohenjo-Daro and dubbed the Priest King, This 17-centimeter-tall statue has become an icon of the civilization. Yet here's the paradox: in a culture that left no palaces, no royal tombs, and no carvings of triumphant rulers, this solitary figure is the closest thing we have to a leader. So who was he really? A spiritual guide, a wealthy merchant, or perhaps something far more ordinary? His expression alone invites debate. Unlike the exaggerated features of Mesopotamian ruler portraits or the rigid idealism of Egyptian pharaohs, this face feels startlingly human. The slight asymmetry of his lips, the heavy-lidded eyes, they suggest contemplation rather than command. The so-called robe draped over one shoulder bears a trefoil pattern, once filled with red pigment, a design later seen in Buddhist monastic robes. Could this be evidence of an early ascetic tradition, a whisper of spiritual practices that would resurface millennia later? Or was the pattern merely decorative, a fashion statement mistaken for sacred symbolism? Then there's his missing kingdom. Every other ancient civilization shouted its hierarchies through art: Assyrian kings trampling enemies, Egyptian pharaohs smiting foes under the watchful eyes of gods. The Indus Valley's silence on power is deafening. No statues of warriors, no depictions of tribute or conquest. In this context, the priest-king seems almost out of place, a lone claimant to a throne that might not have existed. Some scholars argue he wasn't a ruler at all, but a revered elder or guild master, his statue less a monument than a memorial. The material tells its own story. Carved from steatite, a soft stone easily worked with tools, the statue lacks the grandeur of marble or obsidian used elsewhere for royal portraits. Its small size suggests portability, perhaps an object carried during ceremonies or passed down generations. The drilled holes at the neck hint at attachments, maybe a necklace or ceremonial garland long since lost. Compare this to the lifelike gold mask of Tutankhamun or the towering statues of Mesopotamian kings, and the contrast is jarring. If this was their idea of a monarch, it speaks to a culture that valued subtlety over spectacle. The most compelling theory strips him of royalty altogether. Recent studies note his garments' resemblance to the shawls worn by Indus terracotta figurines of ordinary men. Could the priest-king simply be a distinguished citizen, a scholar, healer, or even a skilled artisan honored for his craft? The statue's discovery near what might have been a wealthy merchant's quarter fuels speculation he was a trade magnate, his status earned through commerce rather than birthright. What lingers isn't just the mystery of his identity, but what his existence implies. In a civilization that celebrated collective achievement over individual glory, this figure, whoever he was, remains an outlier. Perhaps that's the point. His power, if he had any, wasn't carved into towering monuments but woven into the quiet fabric of daily life. Unlike the god-kings of other cultures whose names were etched into history, this man's legacy is as ambiguous as the civilization that shaped him. A single face emerging from the shadows, still daring us to define him. Beneath the windswept sands of Kalibangan lie strange circular platforms, their brick-lined edges rising from the earth like the ribs of some long-buried beast. At first glance, they appear almost ordinary, sun-baked remnants of ancient floors or courtyards, but look closer and their precision unsettles. These aren't random circles. The largest spans over 15 meters across, its bricks radiating outward in perfect symmetry, intersected by smaller platforms arranged with geometric intent. No other Indus Valley site has structures quite like these. So what were they for? A stage for sacrifices, a blueprint of the cosmos, or something far more pragmatic? The ritual theory draws eerie parallels. Centuries after Kalibangan's abandonment, Vedic texts would describe yagna altars, circular or square fire pits where priests offered sacrifices to the gods. Some of these later altars even mirrored the exact dimensions of Kalibangan's platforms. Could these bricks have once held sacred flames, their patterns encoding celestial knowledge? Archaeologists note charred remnants and ash deposits near the structures, hinting at fire rituals. One platform bears a curious central pit, perhaps designed to channel offerings skyward. The alignment is equally provocative. Several platforms orient toward solstice sunrises, suggesting a link between ceremony and the movement of the heavens. Yet the granary argument holds surprising weight. At Harappa, circular foundations once supported massive wooden silos to store grain, their raised designs protecting harvests from floods and rodents. Kalibangan's platforms share key features: ventilation gaps between bricks, elevated positions above the water table. Could these have been the skeletons of towering grain stores, their wooden superstructures long since rotted away? The site's location near the Gaga-Hakra riverbed supports this. Fertile land would have yielded surplus crops needing storage. Opponents counter that the platforms lack the thick walls typical of granaries, and the intricate brick patterns seem unnecessarily ornate for mere storage. A third possibility merges both ideas, that these circles served dual roles. In many ancient cultures, food and faith were inseparable. Grain stores doubled as temples, their bounty considered divine gifts. Perhaps Kalibangan's platforms hosted both practical stockpiling and seasonal ceremonies thanking deities for the harvest. The later yagna altars often included grain offerings, blurring the line between warehouse and shrine. Even the astronomical alignments could have practical roots. Tracking seasons was as vital for planting as for ritual calendars. The true enigma lies in their isolation. Why would such sophisticated structures appear only at Kalibangan? Was this city a spiritual hub, its platforms unique to local beliefs? Or did other settlements build similar circles in perishable materials, leaving no trace? The answer might lie beneath unexcavated mounds, but for now, these silent rings refuse to yield their secrets. They stand as an architectural riddle, a meeting point of hunger and holiness where the sacred and the mundane may have been one and the same. Dig through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, and you'll find pottery everywhere, storage jars taller than a person, delicate drinking cups, sturdy cooking pots. But here's what you won't find: the vibrant, story-covered ceramics that fill museums from ancient Greece or China. Indus Valley pottery is, for the most part, stubbornly plain. No gods battling serpents, no geometric labyrinths, not even the simple floral motifs common in Mesopotamia. Just smooth, unadorned clay, shaped with clinical precision but devoid of decoration. In a world where most cultures used pottery as a canvas, why did the Indus people treat theirs like a blank slate? This isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a statistical anomaly. Excavations have unearthed thousands upon thousands of Indus vessels, yet less than 5% bear any decoration beyond the occasional scratch or fingerprint. Compare that to contemporary Minoan pottery from Crete, where even wine jugs for everyday use swirled with octopuses and lilies, or the black and red ware of Egypt, its surfaces alive with hieroglyphs and hunting scenes. The contrast is jarring. Either the Indus Valley had a cultural aversion to ornamentation, or we're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. One theory points to sheer practicality. The Indus cities were hubs of mass production, their potters churning out standardized wares with almost industrial efficiency. Decoration takes time that might have been better spent meeting the demands of a booming urban population. Some scholars argue their pottery's uniformity reflects a society that valued function over flair, where a well-fired pot's ability to hold water mattered more than its appearance. Even their kilns support this. Excavated furnaces show evidence of assembly line production, with stacks of nearly identical vessels fired at once. But there's a counter-argument lurking in the few decorated pieces we do have. The rare painted pots from the Indus Valley aren't crude or hastily done, they're masterful. Delicate fish and birds dance across their surfaces, rendered with fluid, confident strokes. If these were the exception rather than the rule, could it mean decorated pottery existed but simply didn't survive? organic pigments fade over millennia, especially in the acidic soils of the Indus floodplains. What looks like a cultural preference for plainness might just be an accident of preservation. Then there's the spiritual angle. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where art often served as a bridge to the divine, the Indus people may have channeled their symbolism elsewhere. Their famous seals, tiny and intricate, bear the weight of their artistic expression, while pottery remained mundane. Perhaps they saw vessels as purely utilitarian, reserving sacred imagery for objects like the Pashupati seal. Alternatively, their decorations could have been temporary patterns painted in henna or plant dyes for festivals, washing away with use and leaving no trace for archaeologists. The most provocative possibility that this plainness was itself a statement. In a civilization where even bricks adhered to perfect ratios, the absence of decoration might reflect a deeper philosophy, one that found beauty in purity of form rather than applied ornament. Their pottery's clean lines and flawless symmetry could have been as intentional as a modern minimalist design, a deliberate rejection of excess in favor of harmony. Whatever the reason, the silence of these pots speaks volumes. While other cultures shouted their beliefs onto clay, the Indus people kept their stories close, leaving us to wonder whether their restraint was a cultural quirk, a preservation fluke, or a quiet rebellion against the noise of history. Scattered across the ruins of Indus Valley homes, buried in the debris of collapsed walls and forgotten storerooms, lie small terracotta figures that seem utterly out of place. These crudely shaped female forms, with exaggerated hips, breasts, and sometimes even pierced navels, stand in stark contrast to the civilization's otherwise refined and abstract artistry. While the famous dancing girl bronze showcases astonishing craftsmanship, these so-called mother goddess figurines appear almost primitive, pinched from rough clay with fingers rather than tools, their features simplified to the point of abstraction. Yet their very crudeness hints at something profound. Were these sacred objects of worship household good luck charms or something as mundane as children's playthings? The fertility goddess theory holds obvious appeal. Similar figurines appear across ancient cultures, from the Venus of Willendorf to Mesopotamian Ishtar statues, all celebrating feminine power and procreation. Some Indus figures clutch their bellies or cradle infants, gestures later echoed in Hindu depictions of goddesses like Hariti. The pierced navels could symbolize umbilical connections to the earth itself, a motif still seen in South Asian folk traditions. But here's the twist: unlike other civilizations where such figures were enshrined in temples, these terracotta women are found in domestic spaces, kitchen corners, under thresholds, even discarded in trash pits. If they were deities, their worship seems startlingly informal, a private whisper rather than a public proclamation. Then there's the toy hypothesis. The figure's small size, often no taller than a finger, and their fragile, unfired clay make them impractical for ritual use. Archaeologists have found similar shapes in later Indian history, explicitly labeled as children's dolls. Could these have been ancient equivalents of ragdolls molded by mothers to amuse their babies? The absence of wear marks complicates this. Well-loved toys should show smoothed edges from handling, yet many figurines remain oddly pristine. Unless, of course, they were meant as ephemeral playthings crafted, briefly cherished, then discarded like modern action figures pulled from cereal boxes. The most provocative angle lies in their contrast with Indus Valley's broader art. Seals and sculptures favored geometric precision and stylized animals, while these figures burst with raw, almost clumsy humanity. This dichotomy might reflect a cultural divide, the abstract for public life, the visceral for private. Later Hindu traditions similarly separate formal temple icons from handmade clay votives used in home shrines. Perhaps these terracotta women weren't goddesses at all, but ancestor figures, tangible reminders of grandmothers or midwives, their exaggerated features emphasizing roles rather than divinity. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their purpose, but what they reveal about Indus domesticity. In a civilization that left no love poetry or family records, these fingerprints pressed into wet clay are among our closest touches to their private lives. Whether sacred or mundane, each one carries the warmth of hands that shaped it 4,000 years ago, hands that may have been a child's first teacher, a craftsperson's quick gift, or a woman's quiet prayer for the future. Their very simplicity makes them powerful. While kings and priests fade into speculation, these humble figures whisper of kitchens and cradles, of the ordinary moments that built an extraordinary civilization. Buried in the workshops of Lothal and Mohenjo-Daro lie fragments of a technological mastery that defies the Bronze Age. Paper-thin carnelian beads glinting like drops of blood, bronze figurines so finely cast they seem to breathe, copper tools sharp enough to rival modern steel. The Indus Valley's metallurgists weren't just skilled, they operated on a level that wouldn't be matched for another 1,000 years. Yet their techniques vanished so completely that later Indian civilizations had to reinvent metalworking from scratch. How could knowledge this advanced leave no trace in the archaeological record? Start with those carnelian beads, less than 2 millimeters thick, some stretch longer than a finger, their surfaces polished to a glassy sheen. Creating them required a mind-bending process. Raw stone was heated to over 300 degrees Celsius, turning the brittle carnelian malleable enough to drill with tiny copper bits, a technique modern lapidaries still struggle to replicate. The holes themselves are engineering marvels, some narrower than a human hair, perfectly straight despite being bored by hand. These weren't just ornaments, they were statements of technical prowess, traded as far as Mesopotamia where they outvalued gold. But here's the baffling part: when the Indus cities declined, the knowledge to make them disappeared. Later Indian cultures produced cruder beads as if the recipe had been erased from history. Then there's the bronze. While Egypt and Mesopotamia worked with simple copper alloys, Indus smiths concocted blends so precise they're still studied today. The dancing girl statue, for instance, mixes copper with just enough tin to prevent corrosion while maintaining flexibility, a ratio modern metallurgists use for high-performance bearings. Their lost wax casting methods allowed intricate details unmatched until Renaissance Europe. Yet, unlike Roman concrete or Damascus steel, these innovations didn't diffuse to neighboring cultures. When the Vedic people later migrated into the region, their metalwork was primitive by comparison, suggesting the Indus secrets died with their cities. Copper tells an even stranger story. Excavated tools show evidence of cold hammering, a process that hardens metal without heat. Some blades retain edges sharper than surgical steel, their molecular structure indicating repeated annealing, a technique requiring exact temperatures impossible to gauge without pyrometers. How did they achieve such precision? No furnaces or crucibles found at Indus sites explain these feats, leading some scholars to propose mobile, smithy camps near mines, leaving minimal traces. Others suspect they used organic materials like bone ash as flux, leaving no residue after millennia. The greatest enigma isn't their skill, but its isolation. Most ancient technologies spread through trade or conquest: pottery styles, weaving patterns, even architectural tricks. Indus metallurgy seems hermetically sealed. One theory blames their resource networks. Their copper came from distant Rajasthan, tin from Afghanistan. When trade collapsed, access to materials may have broken the chain of apprenticeship. Another possibility is too much specialization. If knowledge was held by elite guilds who perished in the civilization's fall, there'd be no one left to teach. But the most haunting idea, that their mastery wasn't seen as extraordinary at the time. Without kings to commission golden death masks or temples demanding bronze idols, their innovations may have served humble daily needs: fishhooks, needles, plow blades. The true tragedy isn't that their knowledge was lost, but that it was so quietly essential no one thought to proclaim it. Today, as scientists reverse engineer their alloys using electron microscopes, we're left to wonder how many other revolutions in craftsmanship have vanished simply because they worked too well to be noticed. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa feels eerily familiar, as if you could overlay a modern city map onto their 4,000-year-old streets. The layout is uncanny: wide main thoroughfares running north-south, narrower lanes branching off at perfect right angles, neighborhoods divided into precise blocks. This wasn't organic growth, it was urban planning on a scale unmatched until the Roman Empire. But here's what's missing: the heart. Unlike Rome's Forum or Athens' Acropolis, these grid cities lack a central plaza, a towering temple, any obvious focal point where power or piety would have concentrated. Were they designed to avoid hierarchies, or have we simply failed to recognize their centers because they were built from materials that didn't survive? The egalitarian argument is compelling. Most ancient cities radiated outward from palaces or sacred sites, their very architecture reinforcing social stratification. Think of Mesopotamian ziggurats looming over cramped commoners' homes, or Egyptian temples dwarfing the mud-brick houses of workers. The Indus Valley's uniformity suggests something radical: a society where no district held inherent privilege. Even the so-called citadels in cities like Mohenjo-Daro aren't positioned centrally but sit oddly offset, their elevated platforms possibly serving flood protection rather than proclaiming dominance. The largest structures we've found are granaries and water tanks, public utilities rather than monuments to power. This level of urban democracy wouldn't reappear until much later in places like classical Athens, and even then only for a privileged few. Yet the absence of central monuments might be an illusion. Wood was abundant in the Indus region, and unlike sun-baked bricks, it decays over millennia. What if their temples or assembly halls stood on wooden pillars, their walls crafted from woven reed or timber? Later Vedic texts describe elaborate wooden sacrificial altars. Could the Indus people have built similarly ephemeral centers? The Great Bath's brick foundation might have supported a towering wooden pavilion, its roof carved with symbols now lost to rot. Even their ordinary houses show evidence of second stories and balconies. Why wouldn't their communal spaces soar higher? Then there's the celestial angle. Some scholars propose that the city's grids themselves were the monument, a vast terrestrial mirror of cosmic order. Certain streets align with solstice sunrises, while the cardinal directions might have held spiritual significance. In this view, the entire city was a temple, its regularity an act of devotion rather than mere engineering. Compare this to Hindu temple towns like Madurai, where concentric streets symbolically recreate the universe. The Indus people may have woven their sacred geography into daily life so thoroughly that standalone monuments felt redundant. The most haunting possibility that their centers weren't physical at all. Oral cultures often anchor collective memory in storytelling spaces, a shaded tree, a riverside gathering spot. Perhaps the true heart of Mohenjo-Daro was an open courtyard where elders recited histories, or a bustling market where rituals doubled as commerce. Unlike stone steels or gold statues, these living monuments leave no trace beyond the stubborn emptiness where we expect a palace or shrine. Their silence challenges our obsession with monumental permanence, suggesting a civilization that invested not in stone but in society itself. A fleeting, perfect balance we're only beginning to imagine. At the edge of the ancient city of Lothal, a massive rectangular basin cuts into the earth, its walls still standing strong after 4,000 years. Nearly 220 meters long, with a sophisticated lock gate system to control water flow, this structure has been called the world's first known dockyard. A bold claim that would place the Indus Valley centuries ahead of other seafaring cultures. But here's where the mystery deepens. If this was truly a bustling port, why do we find so few traces of the ships that supposedly sailed from it? And why is the evidence for trade beyond Mesopotamia so frustratingly scarce? The dockyard theory hinges on ingenious engineering. The basin connects to the nearby Sabarmati River via a narrow channel, its brick-lined walls designed to withstand tidal surges. Archaeologists found a spillway to regulate water levels, just like modern docks, and a series of steps that could have served as loading platforms. Most convincing are the discovery of stone anchors and a seal depicting a mastless, high-prowed vessel, direct hints that Lothal's people knew their way around boats. The layout even accounts for seasonal floods, with raised warehouses protecting goods from water damage. It's a blueprint that wouldn't look out of place in a medieval harbor. But skeptics raise compelling counterpoints. The basin's position, slightly inland from the ancient shoreline, makes it awkward for large ships to access. No shipyards or repair facilities have been found nearby, and the anchors could just be weights for fishing nets. The alternative, a massive reservoir designed to store monsoon rains for irrigation or drinking. Similar structures exist at other Indus sites, like Dholavira's reservoirs, and Lothal's basin shows signs of silt layers consistent with stagnant water, not tidal activity. If it was a dock, why is there so little evidence of the goods that would have passed through it? The trade conundrum adds another layer. We know the Indus Valley traded with Mesopotamia. Seals and carnelian beads prove that. But if Lothal was a maritime hub, where are the traces of connections to Oman, Persia, or the Red Sea, all within plausible sailing distance? Mesopotamian texts mention ships from Meluha, likely the Indus region, bringing exotic woods and gems, but archaeological evidence of return voyages, Mesopotamian goods in Indus ports, is oddly thin. A handful of foreign pottery shards and a single Babylonian cylinder seal hardly constitute proof of a thriving trade network. Perhaps the answer lies in the perishable. Unlike Mediterranean cultures that traded in durable amphorae or stone statues, the Indus people might have dealt in fabrics, spices, or even ideas, goods that leave no trace. Their ships, built from wood and reeds, would have rotted away, leaving only those cryptic stone anchors. Or maybe Lothal's dockyard served a more localized role, a hub for riverine trade along the Gujarat coast rather than oceanic voyages. The Harappans were meticulous planners. If they'd intended transoceanic trade, wouldn't we find more infrastructure? The most tantalizing possibility is that we're seeing only a fragment of a larger system. Lothal's basin might have been one link in a chain of ports, most now submerged by rising sea levels or buried under modern settlements. Recent underwater surveys off India's coast reveal submerged river valleys that could have hosted sister harbors. Until we find them, Lothal's great dockyard remains a riddle, a structure too advanced to dismiss as just a reservoir, yet too isolated to confirm as the heart of a maritime empire. Its true purpose may lie somewhere in the tides between, a reminder that even the most solid bricks can't always anchor history's mysteries. In the grand symphony of ancient civilizations, where Egyptian sistrums jingled, Mesopotamian lyres hummed, and Greek oloi wailed, the Indus Valley sits in eerie silence. Not a single harp string, drum fragment, or even a crude whistle has been definitively tied to their culture. This absence strikes a dissonant chord when you consider their other refinements: standardized weights, surgical-grade bronze tools, even that famous dancing girl frozen mid-motion. How could a people so advanced leave no trace of music, an art form as universal as language itself? The silence grows stranger when you compare artifacts. In Egypt, tomb paintings depict musicians performing for the dead. Mesopotamian cylinder seals show banquets alive with lute players. Even prehistoric European caves yielded bone flutes older than the pyramids. Yet in Indus cities, nothing unless you count a handful of hollow clay balls some optimists suggest might be rattles. The contrast is jarring. Either their music was so sacred it was never committed to durable materials, or so mundane that it didn't warrant preservation. Or perhaps the answer lies in what didn't survive. Consider bamboo. The Indus floodplains would have teemed with this fast-growing reed, perfect for crafting flutes or panpipes. Modern South Asian folk traditions still use bamboo instruments like the bansuri, whose sweet, breathy notes fade without a trace in the archaeological record. Leather drums stretched over wooden frames would have decayed within centuries in the humid soil. Even the earliest known Indian treatise on music, the Natya Shastra, describes instruments made wholly of perishable materials: gourd resonators, silk strings, beeswax tuning pegs. If the Indus people followed similar practices, their entire musical heritage might have vanished like morning mist. Yet there's a counter-argument whispering through the ruins. Seals depicting rituals show figures with arms raised, heads tilted, postures modern scholars recognize as dance poses. If they danced, wouldn't they have made music to accompany it? The rhythmic clatter of copper bells found in some homes could have kept time for songs now lost. And what of the human voice? Oral traditions might have carried melodies across generations until they were absorbed into later Vedic chants, their origins blurred beyond recognition. The taboo theory slithers through this silence like an unsettling melody. Some cultures, early Islam, certain Puritan sects viewed music as sinful, distracting from spiritual focus. Could the Indus people have shared this aversion? Their art leans heavily on geometric precision. Perhaps chaotic, emotive music clashed with their love of order. The Pashupati seal's meditative figure sits in yogic stillness. No drummer or flautist attends him. If their spirituality valued inner quiet over outward celebration, music might have been deliberately excluded from their durable artifacts. Then again, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. What if music was simply too ordinary to immortalize? We don't find ancient toothbrushes either, yet we know they cleaned their teeth. The Indus people might have seen music as a fleeting, everyday joy, not something to carve in stone or cast in metal. Like the scent of cooking fires or the laughter of children, it filled their streets then dissipated, leaving no fingerprints for us to find. Their silence, then, isn't an emptiness, it's a reminder that some of history's most vibrant notes were written on air, buried beneath the floors of Harappan homes or clustered in the outskirts of their cities. Strange ceramic urns whisper of funerary rites that defy easy explanation. These pots, some small enough to cradle in your arms, others towering nearly a meter high, contain fragments of bones, handfuls of ash, and occasionally tiny treasures like carnelian beads or copper rings. But here's what unsettles archaeologists. Unlike the grand tombs of Egypt or the elaborate burial mounds of Mesopotamia, these vessels suggest a practice suspended between commemoration and concealment. Were they primary graves holding whole bodies in fetal positions, or vessels for secondary ceremonies where bones were collected after flesh had decayed? The answer might rewrite our understanding of how the Indus people confronted mortality and what they believed awaited beyond it. Take the evidence from Kalibangan, where urns were found carefully arranged in pits, some capped with smaller pots like lids. The bones inside show signs of weathering, suggesting they were exposed to elements before being gathered, a hallmark of secondary burial. Yet at Lothal, similar pots contain skeletons curled tightly as if placed fresh inside, their joints still articulated. This inconsistency hints at regional variations or even shifting traditions across centuries. The real enigma lies in the grave goods. A child's urn might hold a toy cart, while an adult's contains shell bangles or a single copper mirror. These aren't the lavish offerings of pharaohs stocking their afterlife, but intimate tokens, objects that feel chosen, not ceremonially prescribed. Later Hindu texts describe antim samskara, rites where ashes are collected in urns after cremation, then immersed in sacred rivers. The parallels are tantalizing, but the gaps loom larger. Indus burials lack the fire altars or charred bones that would confirm cremation, and their urns are interred in soil, not water. Even the skeletal placement contradicts later practices. Hindu secondary burials typically involve crushed bones, while Indus remains are often startlingly intact. This isn't a straight line of tradition, it's a frayed thread, leaving us to wonder whether later cultures borrowed fragments of these rituals or arrived at similar solutions independently. The most haunting theory suggests these pots weren't about the dead at all, but the living. In modern Bali, similar secondary burials serve a dual purpose: practical decomposition followed by a final ceremony meant to release the soul. Could the Indus urns have been stored beneath homes for years, keeping ancestors close until a collective ritual severed the bond? The occasional urn found shattered near cemetery edges hints at intentional breaking, a symbolic freeing of spirits. Yet without inscriptions or depictions of funerary rites, we're left deciphering shadows. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their methods, but what these practices reveal about their worldview. While Egyptians mummified bodies for eternity and Mesopotamians feared restless ghosts, the Indus people seem to have embraced impermanence. Their burials whisper of cycles, of flesh returning to earth, bones becoming relics, and memory itself held in fragile clay. In a civilization that left no temples to afterlife gods, these humble pots may be the closest we come to understanding their quiet philosophy. That death, like their rivers, was both a parting and a current, carrying some essence onward while leaving only traces in the silt. Buried beneath the dust of Mohenjo-Daro's abandoned streets, archaeologists made a discovery that defies everything we assume about ancient panic. Precious carnelian necklaces left coiled in clay pots, stacks of bangles still waiting on workshop shelves, even hoards of silver tucked beneath doorways untouched for millennia. These weren't hidden treasures, they were valuables left in plain sight, as if their owners stepped out for a moment and never returned. In most ancient cities, invaders or scavengers would have stripped such wealth within days. Yet here, jewelry that would have crowned Mesopotamian queens or filled Egyptian tombs lay forgotten. What kind of collapse leaves gold behind without a fight? The answer might upend our ideas about what the Indus people truly valued. Consider the sheer scale of these abandoned riches. At Mohenjo-Daro, a single house yielded over 200 unfinished stone beads, laboriously drilled, polished, and then abandoned mid-craft. At Harappa, a potter's kiln held freshly fired vessels never collected. This isn't the aftermath of a hasty flight, it's a snapshot of sudden paralysis. Unlike Pompeii, where volcanic ash froze a moment of terror, these objects suggest something eerier. A slow unraveling so profound that even precious materials lost their meaning. Climate models offer one clue. As the Saraswati River vanished, drought may have dragged on for generations, turning wealth into dead weight. A silver ring can't irrigate fields or feed children. But there's a darker, more poetic possibility. Across cultures, from the Viking ship burials to Maya cenote offerings, humans have sacrificed valuables to mark endings. Could these abandoned hoards be deliberate farewells? The positioning is telling: jewelry placed in niches, tools arranged neatly near doorways, as if performing one last act of order before departure. Later Hindu traditions speak of pratistha, rituals to deactivate sacred objects when temples are abandoned. Perhaps the Indus people practiced their own version, releasing not just places but the very concept of possession. The most radical theory challenges our capitalist biases head-on. What if these cities thrived without equating wealth with individual status? Unlike Egypt's tomb robbers or Mesopotamia's looted palaces, Indus settlements show no evidence of private vaults or elite hoards. Their treasures are often workshop stock, not personal adornments, a craftsman's inventory, not a noble's ransom. Even the famed dancing girl statue was cast in bronze, not gold. Their values might have leaned toward communal stewardship, where resources circulated rather than accumulated. When collapse came, there were no kings to protect their spoils, just communities walking away from things that no longer served life. The silence of these untouched treasures speaks louder than any plundered tomb. They force us to reckon with a civilization that may have measured prosperity differently, not in stacked gold, but in shared water systems, not in gilded statues, but in the quiet precision of a potter's wheel left spinning empty, waiting for hands that would never return. Scattered across the ruins of Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other Indus Valley cities, small polished cubes of chert and agate tell a silent story of precision, weights so meticulously calibrated that they follow an exact binary system. The smallest, barely larger than a grain of rice, weighs around 0.87 grams, double that, and you get the next size, double again and again, all the way up to 13.7 kilograms. This isn't random, it's a mathematical masterclass, a standardized weight system that would make modern metric enthusiasts nod in approval. But here's the paradox: despite this obsession with measurement, archaeologists have yet to uncover anything resembling a grand marketplace. No sprawling bazaars, no centralized trading halls, just those enigmatic weights tucked away in houses and workshops. If trade was the lifeblood of this civilization, where did the pulse actually beat? One theory unravels this mystery by reimagining commerce itself. Instead of bustling market squares, Indus trade might have unfolded in the intimacy of homes. Picture a potter's courtyard doubling as a sales floor, where buyers brought their own weights to verify exchanges. The uniformity of those stone cubes suggests a shared language of measurement, trusted enough to operate without oversight. Modern parallels exist. Think of Moroccan souks spilling into residential alleys, or the decentralized trade hubs of medieval Venice. The Indus people may have turned entire neighborhoods into open-air markets, transactions happening on doorsteps or under shaded verandas. When the day ended, there'd be no permanent stalls to leave traces, just the weights themselves pocketed until next time. Yet absence of structures doesn't mean absence of ceremony. Some excavated platforms, like those at Lothal, bear markings that could have anchored temporary awnings or seasonal trade fairs. Monsoon rains or harvest cycles might have dictated when vendors gathered, their goods spread on woven mats that decayed millennia ago. Seasonal markets still define economies in parts of rural India and Africa, leaving little archaeological footprint beyond scattered pottery shards. If the Indus cities hosted similar events, their ephemeral nature would explain why we find weights but no walls. The most provocative angle challenges our very definition of a marketplace. What if trade wasn't a place at all, but a process? Seals bearing unicorn motifs and script have been found as far as Mesopotamia, suggesting a system of contracts or warranties attached to goods. A merchant might have stored cloth in their home, sealed it with a personal insignia, and sent it abroad with a trusted carrier. The weights then weren't just tools but tokens of trust, a decentralized eBay of the Bronze Age, where reputation traveled farther than any marketplace's shadow. But the counterargument lingers. Other contemporary civilizations, Memphis, Babylon, built monumental market halls and inscribed tax codes on tablets. Why would the Indus Valley, with its obsession with order, reject such visible commerce, unless, of course, their priorities lay elsewhere? Their cities thrived on shared infrastructure, wells, drains, grids, all designed for collective benefit. Perhaps trade, too, was treated as a communal utility, its mechanisms too mundane to monumentalize. The weights remain not as proof of a gap, but as clues to a system so seamlessly woven into daily life that it vanished when the people did, leaving us to measure the void they left behind. Among the quiet graves of the Indus Valley, one type of burial stands apart, not for its opulence, but for its unexpected tenderness: dogs. Not just discarded bones, but carefully arranged skeletons, their bodies curled as if in sleep, sometimes nestled beside human remains or tucked into their own small graves with pottery offerings. These aren't the mass sacrifices seen in later cultures or the casual disposal of working animals. Each burial feels intentional, personal. In a civilization that left behind no love poetry or family records, these quiet acts of care speak volumes. Why did dogs, and only dogs, merit such attention among all domesticated animals? Take the grave at Lothal, where a terracotta bowl was placed near a dog's muzzle, perhaps holding a final meal. Or the pair of skeletons found in Harappa, a human and a dog buried side by side, their spines aligned as if they'd lain down together. Contrast this with the treatment of cattle, goats, or even revered animals like the humped zebu. None received such individual rights. Cattle bones appear in trash pits or butchery sites, utilitarian to the end. The distinction is stark. Dogs weren't just kept, they were companions, guardians, or perhaps something more sacred. The ritual angle raises intriguing possibilities. Later Hindu traditions linked dogs to thresholds of life and death. The god Shiva's attendant, Bhairava, rides a dog, while ancient Vedic texts describe canines as psychopomps guiding souls to the afterlife. Could these Indus burials reflect an early version of such beliefs? The placement of some dogs near doorways or boundaries hints at a protective role, their spirits standing watch even in death. Yet the absence of ritual markers, no altars, no carvings, leaves the theory lingering in the realm of speculation. Then there's the practical lens. Dogs may have been indispensable for tasks we've underestimated. Their bones show wear patterns suggesting they pulled loads or guarded flocks, while their keen senses could have aided in hunting or even early sanitation by scavenging waste. A valued working animal might deserve burial as a sign of respect, much like police or military dogs today. But why no similar burials for donkeys or oxen, which labored just as hard? The answer might lie in something harder to quantify: affection. Modern studies reveal that burying pets often correlates with societies where animals are seen as individuals rather than tools. The Indus dogs' graves lack the grandeur of Egyptian cat mummies or Assyrian royal hounds, but their simplicity makes them more relatable. A child's hand placing a toy bead in a grave, a bowl set down with deliberate care. These gestures cross millennia, hinting at bonds we recognize instantly. The mystery deepens when you consider what these burials lack. No mass graves suggest epidemic cults, no charred bones point to sacrificial pyres. Each interment feels like a private farewell. Were these dogs companions to lone individuals, or did the entire community share in their significance? Without written records, we're left with silent earth and bones, a puzzle wrapped in the oldest human emotion, the need to say goodbye to a creature that mattered. In the end, the dog burials offer no easy answers, only a poignant reminder that 4,000 years haven't dulled the ache of losing a faithful friend. Their graves are whispers in the dark, proof that even a civilization as enigmatic as the Indus Valley knew the weight of a dog's paw print on the human heart. Scattered across the ruins of Calibangan and Lothal, strange rectangular platforms rise from the earth, some no larger than a prayer mat, others big enough to hold a sacrificial bull. Their surfaces bear the unmistakable stains of ancient fire, layers of ash and charcoal pressed into the bricks like ghostly fingerprints. At first glance, they seem ordinary, perhaps the remnants of communal hearths or industrial kilns. But look closer and the patterns emerge, the precise arrangement of bricks in multiples of 7, the strategic placement of flues to channel air, even the occasional discovery of charred grains or animal bones. These aren't merely cooking pits, they're fire altars, and their design raises a question that's divided scholars for decades. Were the architects of these structures the same people who composed the Vedas, or did their flames flicker out long before the so-called Aryan migration? The parallels with Vedic rituals are unsettlingly precise. Centuries after the Indus cities fell, Hindu texts would describe yajna ceremonies, elaborate fire sacrifices performed on brick altars, their dimensions and shapes dictated by sacred geometry. The Shatapatha Brahmana, a guide to Vedic rites, specifies altars built with exactly 21 bricks arranged in 3 layers. Excavations at Calibangan reveal platforms matching this description, down to the deliberate gaps left between bricks to oxygenate flames. Even the animal bones found near some altars mirror later Vedic sacrifices, particularly those of goats and cattle, creatures central to ancient Hindu offerings. It's as if the rituals of the Vedas didn't arrive with outsiders but were already smoldering in the Indus Valley's collective memory, yet skepticism flares just as hot. Alternative interpretations paint these platforms as proto-industrial rather than sacred communal ovens for baking bricks or smelting copper, their ash merely the residue of craft, not worship. The sacrificial bones could be butchery waste, and the brick counts might reflect practical construction techniques rather than mystical numerology. Even the term fire altar itself may be a projection, a modern label slapped onto structures whose true purpose evaporated with the voices that built them. After all, every ancient society used fire. Why assume these platforms held spiritual significance unless their creators told us so? The debate hinges on a deeper riddle, the relationship between the Indus people and the Vedic Aryans. Traditional narratives once depicted a violent clash, with horse-riding invaders from the north overthrowing the Harappan cities and imposing their own beliefs. But the fire altars complicate this story. If Vedic practices existed in the Indus Valley centuries before the supposed Aryan arrival, did the newcomers adopt local traditions rather than replace them? Linguistic clues add fuel to the theory. The Vedic word for brick, ish letter 1e60 akmakron, bears an uncanny resemblance to the Dravidian ishti, hinting at cultural cross-pollination. Perhaps the Aryans didn't bring the yajna to India, perhaps they found it already burning and simply added their own verses to the chant. Then there's the silence of the seals. If fire worship was central to Indus spirituality, why don't their famous seals depict altars or sacrifices? The absence is deafening compared to Mesopotamian artifacts, where priests and offerings crowd every cylinder seal. Maybe the altars served a function we've yet to imagine: communal kitchens for feast days, or even early laboratories where metalsmiths tested alloys under ritual pretenses. The pipal leaves occasionally found in the ash suggest connections to later Hindu rites, but were these leaves sacred symbols or just convenient fuel? The most haunting possibility is that the fire altars represent a bridge between worlds, not just between the Indus and Vedic cultures, but between the practical and the divine. Their flames may have warmed hands and forged tools by day, then transformed into ceremonial beacons by night, their light flickering against the same stars that would later guide Vedic poets. In the end, these platforms are palimpsests, their original meaning scraped away by time, leaving only embers of a truth we're still piecing together: that the past rarely surrenders to simple stories of conquest or continuity, but lingers in the spaces between, where ash and prayer share the same ground. Beneath the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro's workshops lie tiny, glass-like beads that shimmer with an otherworldly blue-green hue, faience masterpieces crafted not from molten sand like true glass, but from crushed quartz fused with minerals and fire. These weren't just ornaments, they were technological marvels, rivaling the finest glazed creations of ancient Egypt while predating them by centuries. The process was alchemy in its purest form. Artisans ground rock crystal into powder, mixed it with plant ash and copper salts, then fired it at temperatures precise enough to transform dull stone into ceramic jewels, all without melting the grains completely. The result, beads so vibrant they mirrored the Indus River's waters, so durable they survived millennia buried in the earth. Yet here's the riddle: this dazzling technology, once perfected, seemingly vanished from South Asia's craft traditions, leaving later Indian cultures to reinvent glazing techniques from scratch. What happened to knowledge this advanced, and why did its legacy dissolve like the glaze itself under monsoon rains? The secret to their brilliance lay in the chemistry. Unlike Egyptian faience, which relied on natron from desert lakes, Indus artisans used locally sourced alkali, likely from burned barley husks or saltwood plants, to lower quartz's melting point. Copper oxide, carefully measured, infused the beads with their signature turquoise, while variations in firing atmosphere created stripes or marbling. Some beads even show deliberate color gradients, proof they understood how heat and oxygen levels could manipulate hues. This wasn't trial and error, it was empirical science disguised as craft. Archaeologists have found miniature crucibles in Mohenjo-Daro, their interiors still coated with glaze residues alongside kilns designed to maintain steady temperatures for hours. The precision suggests generations of guarded trade secrets, passed down in workshops where apprentices mastered fire as intimately as painters master brushes. But why didn't this expertise endure? One clue lies in the beads themselves. Faience production demanded not just skill, but specific resources: high-purity quartz from distant Gujarat, copper from Rajasthan's mines, and alkaline plants that may have grown only in seasonal wetlands. As the Saraswati River dried up and trade routes fractured, accessing these materials became impossible. Unlike bronze or pottery, which could adapt to local substitutes, faience was unforgiving. A slight impurity in the quartz or a shift in the alkali ratio resulted in dull, crumbly failures. The technology may have been too fragile for a civilization in collapse, its complexity a liability when survival trumped luxury. There's a deeper cultural layer, too. Faience in Egypt was tied to divinity. The blue-green hues symbolized the Nile's life force, and amulets were mass-produced for tombs. Indus faience, by contrast, shows no obvious religious motifs. Beads appear in graves but also in drains and refuse piles, suggesting they were everyday commodities. Without the anchor of sacred symbolism, the craft may have lacked the institutional support to survive hard times. Later Indian cultures revered gold and gemstones, associating permanence with value, while faience's ceramic nature might have seemed impermanent by comparison. The greatest irony: modern studies reveal Indus faience was often superior to Egypt's, with tighter molecular bonds and richer colors. Yet because their artisans left no inscriptions or diagrams, their methods died with them. When glazing re-emerged in India centuries later under Islamic influences, it followed entirely different techniques, as if the Indus achievements had been erased from memory. Their beads now sit in museum cases, glowing silently against the velvet testaments to a brilliance that burned bright, then faded without a whisper, leaving us to wonder how many other revolutions in craft have been lost simply because no one thought to write them down. In the grand pantheon of ancient civilizations, where Egypt raised statues of hawk-headed Horus and Mesopotamia carved idols of storm-wielding Enlil, the Indus Valley stands in eerie silence. Walk through the ruins of their cities and you'll find no towering temples, no processional avenues lined with divine effigies, not even a single unambiguous depiction of a deity carved in stone. This absence isn't just puzzling, it's revolutionary. How could a civilization advanced enough to build grid-planned cities and precision water systems leave behind no trace of the gods who supposedly watched over them? The answer might lie not in what's missing, but in what we've failed to recognize. Consider the artifacts we do have. The famous Pashupati seal shows a horned figure surrounded by animals, often compared to later Hindu gods like Shiva. But here's the catch: it's tiny, barely larger than a postage stamp, and one of only a handful of potential divine representations. Contrast this with Egypt's Karnak temple, where entire forests of columns are carved with gods, or Mesopotamia's ziggurats, each tier screaming with divine imagery. The Indus people either rejected idol worship entirely or expressed spirituality in ways that bypassed physical form. Some scholars argue their religion was aniconic, like early Islam or Judaism, forbidding human-like depictions of the divine. Others suggest their gods weren't absent but everywhere, in the rivers they channeled, the trees they carved onto seals, even the bricks they shaped with geometric perfection. The natural world may hold the key. Later Hindu traditions venerate sacred rivers, fire altars, and pipal trees, all elements subtly present in Indus artifacts. The Great Bath's carefully contained waters could have been more than a public utility. Perhaps it was a liquid temple, its stillness reflecting the sky like a mirror of the cosmos. The recurring unicorn motif on seals might not be a mythical beast at all, but a stylized zebu bull crowned with the crescent moon, blending animal and celestial worship into a single symbol. Even their city layouts, aligned with solstice sunrises, suggest a religion woven into the fabric of daily life rather than compartmentalized in shrines. Yet the silence of their sacred spaces remains deafening. Unlike Mesopotamia's temple granaries or Egypt's god-king pyramids, the Indus Valley's largest structures are resolutely practical: wells, granaries, drainage systems. If they worshipped, did they do so under open skies, their rituals leaving no permanent mark? The fire altars at Kalibangan hint at ceremonies tied to flames and smoke, substances that vanish without a trace. Or perhaps their temples were domestic, their gods' household spirits honored at small altars now crumbled to dust. The terracotta mother goddess figurines found in homes might represent personal devotion rather than state religion, a private spirituality that needed no grand stage. The most radical possibility, that their civilization thrived without the need for gods as we understand them. Their cities show no evidence of priestly elites hoarding power, no treasuries filled with votive offerings. Maybe their philosophy centered on harmony with natural order rather than supplication to divine rulers. The precision of their weights, the symmetry of their bricks, these could have been acts of reverence in themselves, a belief that cosmic balance was maintained through human precision rather than prayer. Unlike the chaotic pantheons of Mesopotamia, where capricious gods demanded constant appeasement, the Indus people may have seen divinity as a rhythm to be mirrored, not a personality to be pleaded with. What lingers is the unsettling beauty of their ambiguity. While other ancient cultures shouted their faith in stone, the Indus whispers theirs in the spaces between the alignment of a street, the flow of water through a drain, the quiet persistence of a clay figurine cradled in the earth. Their religion, if we can call it that, might have been too seamless, too integrated to leave behind the scars we recognize as sacred. In the end, their greatest spiritual innovation could have been this very absence, a silent testament to the idea that the divine needs no house when it lives in the hands that build, the rivers that flow, and the bricks that endure. Hidden in the bloodlines of modern South Asia, a genetic whisper defies 4,000 years of silence, the enduring legacy of the Indus Valley people. Recent DNA studies reveal something astonishing. Despite the collapse of their cities and the disappearance of their script, the Indus genes never vanished. They pulse through the veins of countless communities today, from farmers in Punjab to fishermen in Tamil Nadu. But here's the paradox that baffles geneticists and linguists alike. How could these people's biological legacy persist so stubbornly while their language and writing dissolved without a trace? The answer lies at the heart of one of history's most contentious debates, where science, politics, and identity collide. Let's start with the hard evidence. Genome sequencing of skeletons from Rakhigarhi and other Indus sites shows striking overlaps with modern South Asian populations, particularly groups historically marginalized as indigenous, like the Bhils and Gons. Their DNA mingles with that of nearly every Indian today, accounting for anywhere from 10 to 50% of ancestry depending on region and caste. This genetic continuity suggests the Indus people didn't simply vanish, they merged, their descendants surviving through millennia of upheaval. Yet when researchers analyze languages spoken in the same regions today, Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, they find no clear linguistic descendants of the Indus script. It's as if a civilization left its body behind but took its voice to the grave. This disconnect fuels the fiery Aryan migration debate. Traditional narratives based on 19th-century European scholarship, painted a picture of light-skinned horse riders sweeping down from Central Asia around 1500 BC, displacing the dark-skinned Indus people and imposing Sanskrit and Vedic culture. But the genetic data complicates this story. There's no evidence of a population replacement, just gradual mixing. The so-called Aryan genes linked to pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe appear in South Asian DNA centuries after the Indus cities declined, and even then, they blend with existing populations rather than erasing them. The real story may be less about conquest and more about slow cultural shifts, where newcomers adopted local traditions even as their language spread. Now consider the linguistic mystery. Most of Europe speaks Indo-European languages, the family that includes English, Spanish, and Hindi, because incoming groups replaced earlier tongues. But in South Asia, the steppe ancestry is relatively minor, yet Indo-European languages dominate. How? One theory suggests the Indus people might have already spoken an early form of Sanskrit or a related language, making the transition seamless. Others argue their original tongue was a lost branch of Dravidian, like modern Tamil or Telugu, which survived only in the south. The irony is profound. The genes endured precisely because the Indus people weren't wiped out, while their language may have faded because elites adopted the newcomer's speech for prestige, much like Latin overtook Gaulish in Roman France. The political stakes simmer beneath the science. Hindu nationalists often reject the Aryan migration theory entirely, seeing it as colonial propaganda that undermines India's indigenous Vedic roots. Meanwhile, Tamil separatists sometimes weaponize the Dravidian connection to claim their culture is the Indus's true heir. The truth, as always, is messier. Genetics reveals a tapestry of migrations, not a single conquest, layers of movement that included not just steppe pastoralists but also Iranian farmers and even earlier African hunter-gatherers. The Indus people were likely already a mosaic, their cities thriving on diversity long before any Aryans arrived. What lingers beyond the debates is a profound lesson about cultural survival. The Indus people's genes endure not in isolation but woven into the subcontinent's vast human fabric. Their culinary traditions like flatbreads and fermented foods may still grace modern tables. Their reverence for water, evident in the Great Bath, echoes in Hindu rituals at rivers like the Ganges. Even their alleged aversion to monumental kingship finds resonance in South Asia's enduring skepticism of centralized power. The script remains unread, the voices lost, but the people never left. They simply became part of the story in ways we're only beginning to understand. A reminder that history is written not just in clay and text, but in the very cells of those who inherit the past. From the precision of their weights to the silence of their temples, the Indus Valley Civilization remains one of history's most tantalizing puzzles, a society that mastered urban planning, metallurgy, and trade, yet left behind no boastful kings, no epic tales, no clear pantheon of gods. These 30 mysteries we've explored aren't just gaps in knowledge, they're windows into a culture that defies easy categorization. A civilization where bricks were standardized down to the millimeter, but rulers, if they existed at all, left no monuments to their power. A people who built dockyards and fire altars but may have rejected war entirely. Each answer we uncover, from the purpose of the Great Bath to the meaning of their undeciphered script, seems to spawn 3 new questions, pulling us deeper into the enigma. What makes the Indus Valley so endlessly fascinating isn't just what we don't know, it's how what we do know challenges everything we assume about ancient societies. They thrived without the trappings of power we've come to expect. No pyramids, no colosseums, no grand tombs stuffed with gold. Instead, their legacy is written in quiet innovations, sewer systems that rival modern engineering, egalitarian cities where every home had access to water, art that captures fleeting humanity in bronze and clay. Yet for all their advancements, their voice remains just out of reach, their stories locked in symbols we can't yet read, and that's the thrill of it. Every broken seal, every scattered skeleton, every abandoned hoard of carnelian beads is a clue waiting to be pieced together. Maybe you have a theory. Could the unicorn on their seals represent a forgotten constellation? Were their fire altars the birthplaces of rituals still practiced today? The beauty of history is that it's never truly settled. New discoveries can rewrite the story overnight. So tell us in the comments which of these mysteries keeps you up at night: the vanished rivers, the dancing girl's untold story, or something we didn't even cover today. If you've made it this far, you're clearly as hooked as we are. Don't let the curiosity stop here. Hit subscribe and join us as we dive into more buried secrets, from the submerged cities of the Mediterranean to the untold stories of the Silk Road. History isn't just about dates and dust. It's a living, breathing detective story, and you're holding the magnifying glass. Who knows, the next big breakthrough might come from a viewer like you, connecting dots that others missed. Until then, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember, sometimes the most powerful civilizations are the ones that